Hello everyone, and welcome to this special edition of Higgsy's Handy Hints, which is covering the topic of how to select your next practice and case management system. For those who weren't with us at our recent Accesspoint Innovators Forum, it's been a while, but nice to see you all again. Over the recent couple of years, we've been focusing on how to get more out of your current practice and case management system through either adding additional third-party applications aimed at addressing specific business needs around the practice and or developing the practice and case management system through additional training and development of existing functionality. And over time, what that's done for firms who've invested in that strategy is it's firstly generated much more value from the overall package, but also it's moved users away from the reliance on that core practice and case management solution, because most of their interactions with the system are effectively through the third-party applications that have been introduced, and the practice and case management system is increasingly simply a source of data serving those applications. Ultimately, then, what that means is that when you're finally ready to make a move to a new practice and case management system, the disruption to the majority of the firm is relatively small. So what happens when you've reached that point? You're now seriously starting to think about selecting your next practice and case management system. Well, over the course of the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to be sharing with you from my experience of 35 years and more of working on the supplier side of this arrangement, those things which seem to work well during the procurement process. Firstly, let me just say right at the top of this, that not everybody is forced into having to change a practice and case management system. Most people will do this of their own choice, and that's usually influenced by a number of factors. So firstly, it may be environmental. So perhaps you're facing a significant hardware refresh around the core servers that run the current practice and case management solution, or maybe there's an office move on the horizon, which is also going to result in a lot of expensive hardware investment. Those two factors may consider you to move to cloud, or you may have decided as a practice in general that you are now adopting a cloud-first strategy. And as a result, your current practice and case management system may well not fit within that environment. So it's time to have a look at something else. Your decision could be influenced by the supplier or the solution you're currently using. So could it be perhaps that that solution is no longer the supplier's go-forward product, and therefore you've seen a slowdown in the development of that application, and the added value that's coming through those additional enhancements is no longer providing what you need from the system going forward. It could be that you struggle to engage with that supplier to get them to build the integrations that you'd like to have with the third-party applications that you've introduced. And over time, it may be that that supplier's costs have increased significantly, both in terms of the ongoing support and maybe in terms of the additional licenses you've been purchasing. So as you're using their system less, ironically, the costs have increased significantly, and it may well have reached a point where you're no longer receiving sufficient value from that practice and case management system to justify those ongoing costs. And just on that point, do check your existing contracts, because most suppliers provide a single window of opportunity to give notice during the course of an annual software contract. So the timing of that could be critical, and what you don't want to end up with is paying for support on the old system long after you've had the new system installed. So do please check that carefully. Sometimes it makes sense to give the supplier notice and then extend that notice period if you're not exactly sure of the timing of the new implementation. Thirdly, there may be operational issues that are influencing you. So perhaps your users are becoming increasingly frustrated by the solution, and they're finding workarounds which are not helping you in terms of your risk and compliance management. Productivity is suffering as a result. Maybe you're not able to get the data you need out of the system to manage your practice more effectively. The solution isn't providing a platform for the business to grow in the way that you would want to. Or you could be in a situation where over a period of time you've made acquisitions or you've merged with other firms and you're running several different practice and case management solutions. And clearly it makes sense to move into a more cohesive single practice case management system environment. So if you're in any of those situations, then it may well be that it's time to start looking for your new practice and case management system. So if you've made that decision, how do you go about identifying potential suppliers? Well, there are a number of ways you can do this. Firstly, and possibly the most reliable one, is to ask other firms that you interact with what they're using and are they happy with it. If you're the member of a network, such as LawNet, for example, those networks tend to keep records of what their members use. So speak to the committee and ask for a list of the firms and what they're using, and then approach those firms that you'd like to talk to about those systems that currently are in use. Talk to those third-party application providers that you've been using in recent years. Who do they find are the best suppliers to work with and the best solutions that integrate with their own application? If you keep an eye on the legal technology press, who's been winning lots of new clients recently? And are the clients that they are winning similar to yourselves in terms of size and makeup? There is a very good recent report that's been written by Neil Cameron on behalf of the Legal Technology Insider magazine, which is looking at the current practice management system market. And in that, he assesses each of the current suppliers, what sort of client firms are using their systems, their functionality, and even includes a roadmap of what's coming over the next 12 months. Once you've got a rough idea of who you want to talk to, ask them for a brief demo, just an online demo if possible, half an hour, 45 minutes, which will give you a flavour of the solution, whether it's the sort of thing you could work with to get that initial assessment before going further. And out of that process, ideally, you want to be looking for 3 to 5 suppliers to take forward into the more detailed discussions. It's also key that you know what you want as a practice going into this investigation. So how do you identify what it is you need? Well, it makes sense to break down those must-haves, the absolute essentials that you need in your new system going forward, and those nice-to-haves, those things that would be great to have as additionals if possible, but they're not deal breakers and not absolutely essential. One of the best ways of finding out what the firm needs overall is to speak to colleagues. Ask your staff via a survey what it is that they like about the current system, what they don't like, whether they've used systems elsewhere and liked them and what they liked about those systems. That will give you a good feel for what sort of things your users are looking for going forward. Plus, it gets an early buy-in to the process and an understanding that they're going to be changing systems in the near future. Also, bear in mind that you don't have to replace one single solution that you're using now for practice and case management, and to an extent document management, with one single solution going forward. It could be that for you, the best way forward is to actually end up with a combination of systems, one for practice management, perhaps even another for case management, and a further for document management. Once you've gathered all of that information, use it to put together a brief request for information RFI document to send out to those suppliers. And in simple terms, what you're looking to achieve here is a brief outline of what your requirements are, almost phrased along the lines of this is us, this is what we do, these are our challenges. Now, how does your solution help us with those? Rather than lead them by the nose, asking lots of questions about their current solution, let them tell you, based on those challenges, how their solution is best going to be able to help you. And if you have a number of integrations that you're either currently using or would like to use going forward, specify those in the RFI to get a feel for where that supplier is with those integrations. Ask them for a ballpark quote. It's not going to be 100% accurate at this stage, but it will allow you to assess where those suppliers sit within the provisional budget that you've agreed for this project. Ask them to name 3 to 5 law firms who are currently using the same solution. And that's very important. There are a number of suppliers in the legal market who have acquired different suppliers over a number of years, and therefore they're still marketing several different solutions. So it's important that you talk to firms or know of firms who are using exactly the same solution that you're going to be discussing with the supplier. A couple of really key questions to get a feel for how committed the supplier is to the product and on what its investment looks like over the coming years. What's their roadmap for the next 1 to 3 years to get an idea of where it's going, but also ask them what they've done in the last 12 months. What sort of key features have been released? Because it's all very well saying what you're going to do, but what have they actually done? And you could judge for yourself how material those updates have been. Should you use a consultant? It's a good question. It really depends, and it depends to an extent on how much help you feel you need in a couple of key areas. So if you're unsure of the requirements, how to assess your requirements, or you need some help doing that, and you don't really know the legal market particularly well, so you'd like some guidance on who to approach, they could be helpful. It could be that the remit is quite technical. You're replacing lots of hardware. You're unfamiliar with cloud and the best way forward with that. Maybe there's some cyber security, etc. involved. All of those things possibly you don't have internal resource to assist you with. So a consultant can be a good external resource to give you the relevant guidance for those things. If you are going to use a consultant, bear in mind they don't have to be involved from the beginning of the process all the way to the end. You could, for example, decide to use them at that initial front end of the process, so identifying your requirements and suppliers, and then you're happy to go on from that point forward. Or it could be that you'd feel more comfortable having some help towards the end of the process, maybe assistance with the demonstrations, assessing the proposals, and negotiating through to the final contract. Whatever it is, agree their remit and the associated fee that comes with that. Do make sure that if they're going to be involved in sending out an invitation to tender document to the prospective suppliers, that you check it through and make sure that it covers exactly what you need. And remember, they're not going to make the decision for you. So they're going to guide, they're going to assist, they're going to advise, but ultimately at the end of the project, it's your decision for what is a system that's going to be supporting your practice for at least the next 5 or 10 years. They will walk away and on to the next project. So how do you approach the detailed demonstrations? Probably the most important step in the whole process. And there's a number of things to bear in mind here. Firstly, make sure you've got an agreed agenda. Always discuss with the supplier beforehand what it is they're going to be showing, what it is you'd like to see, and that may be subdivided between the different groups that are going to be demonstrated to on the day. And what that means is everybody coming to the presentations on the day should know what to expect, and the supplier is able to prepare themselves as best as they can to cover all of those requirements that have been noted. Ideally, you want to hold the presentations on site. It's too easy these days to say, let's jump on a Teams call or a Zooms call, but you're going to get a much better feel for the supplier by having them on site. Ideally, a number of presentations over the course of the day based at different groups within the practice, your accounts team, risk and compliance, different work areas and so on, so that everybody gets focused coverage on their particular requirements during the course of the day. In addition to the subjective feedback that you're going to receive from those that attended the presentations, it's useful to have alongside that some form of objective scoring method. So by giving the attendees scorecards against which they can mark each presentation, you've got a way of comparing the subjective with the objective feedback after the supplier has left. And what you're looking for throughout the course of the day is how well do these demonstrations match our requirements? Has the supplier listened? Have they understood the remit? Are they coming back with the challenges that we have and showing how their system demonstrably addresses those challenges, and maybe citing clients in the real world of theirs using the solution who've had the same challenge, and this is how they've used the system to address that. How well do they know their solution? Does it appear that they're more often than not, when you're asking questions, they're going to have to take the question away and come back to you? Or are they quite confident in answering the question and, where appropriate, showing you the answer to your question via the demonstration? How many of them attend? So you're putting effectively your firm at their disposal, I should say, for the course of the day. If one person arrives with a laptop and expects to run the whole process for the course of the day, that doesn't show much in the way of commitment from that supplier. What you should typically see is at least 2, and ideally 3 or 4, where they're bringing subject matter experts to assist in focused areas such as accounts or legal aid, if those are requirements for you. How engaging are they? At the end of the day, this is going to be a long-term relationship. So do you get on with them? Could you work with these people? Do they come across like they understand? They're enthusiastic about their product. They're passionate about working with you and making things better for you based on overcoming the challenges that you've laid out for them. And another really key one is ultimately there are going to be some questions that the supplier is going to have to take away and come back to you, speak to colleagues, etc. How well do they respond to those questions? Ideally within 24 hours would be a good assessment. But if you find yourself a week later chasing for those responses and you still haven't got them back, then that suggests to you that life with that supplier in the future isn't going to be really in line with what you'd expect. So how do you shortlist, having gone through the process? Well, clearly you're looking at your overall assessment of each supplier and solution for a number of things. You've got your scoring system, which is going to give you your objective viewpoint on each of the suppliers and solutions. You've got the subjective likability. Did we like the solution? Did we like the supplier? Does it address what we want it to do? How well does it actually do the job for us? Can we actually work with these people? Price, it's important, but it's not the be all and end all. So don't get too hung up on the price, because ultimately what you're looking for is the best value. So it could be that the system that addresses all of the must-haves and most, if not all of the nice-to-haves, and is the one that most people appear to like best, could also be the most expensive. So there's no point buying the cheapest one if it doesn't address all of the must-haves, most of the nice-to-haves, and it isn't particularly well liked by your staff. So just bear that one in mind. It's value that you're looking for. And do make sure that when you're doing your comparison, you're comparing apples with apples. Unfortunately, there isn't a standardized proposal or quote that suppliers will provide you with. So ideally, take their information and put it into some sort of standardized spreadsheet that you can formulate yourselves or with the help of your consultant. And in there, you will quickly identify if there are gaps in what's being provided from one supplier to another. So for example, one supplier may be quoting you the whole data migration. Somebody else may not mention data migration. Somebody else might be quoting end user training. Others haven't factored that in. So it's important that you make sure that you're comparing apples with apples. It's also very important that you extrapolate the initial costs into what's called a total cost of ownership. So look at what the system is going to cost you over at least 5 years, more likely 10 and perhaps beyond. And it's interesting to see that sometimes those systems which look more expensive at the beginning of the process over a period of time can actually even out and sometimes become the least expensive of those that you're looking at. And if you can, ask the supplier to give you some indication of what the annual or contractual increases are going to be during that time of ownership and factor them into your numbers. Once you're down to that preferred supplier, it's really, really important to speak to some reference sites. So always, always, always ask for them. You choose who to approach. So it may well be that the same 3 to 5 suppliers you asked for in the initial, practices that you asked for in the initial RFI are those that you're being given to approach. But if you feel that you're being led down a particular road and the same practice name is always coming up, just be wary. That could be this supplier's pet reference site that they use for everybody. So you're less likely to get an unbiased, independent view of life with the system. So wherever possible, you look to choose a firm or firms which are most similar to you in terms of size, work types, challenges, and so on. And then you make those approaches. So ideally, I would speak to at least 2, visit one if at all possible. And whilst you're speaking to them and or on site, in addition to the stuff that you're undoubtedly wanting to ask them, bear in mind these key questions. So how well is the system used or liked by staff? What's the support like? Have you had any major issues, and how well did the supplier respond to those? How often is the software updated? And when it is updated, is there real material value being added to the solution? Does the supplier keep you informed of those changes? Does your account manager perhaps come in and show you an overview of those new changes so you can view for yourselves how useful they might be to implement within your practice? Overall, how valued do you feel as a client? Do you have a voice? If you ask for something to be changed on the system, does it get acknowledged, and does it actually filter through into a subsequent update? And the real killer question, if you were looking now, how likely is it that you buy this system? Very, very important. Oh, and if they have a user group, which is sadly relatively rare nowadays, do ask to be put in touch with the user group chair or committee, because they will often have a very good feel for how the supplier is in terms of dealing with the clients. So on to the final negotiations. I would suggest when you shortlist to your preferred supplier, keep one in reserve. and let the other ones know fairly promptly that unfortunately they've been successful, because there's nothing worse than being on the sales side of the relationship, just not knowing, and then you're going to find yourself getting pestered. So just be honest and upfront with those people who haven't made it, but do keep one in reserve just in case the one that you select doesn't finally sort of cut the mustard when you go through the final stage of the process. And do remember, making the decision is not signing the order. And the reason I say that is I've seen it many, many times where there's sort of collective sigh of relief across the firm when they've decided which system they want to go with, and everybody disappears back to their day jobs. But somebody needs to take responsibility and keep the momentum going to get the order signed, because of course, until the order is signed, then nothing can actually happen. And the worst case I ever experienced of this was reaching preferred supplier status within 6 months, and it took a further 12 months before the firm finally signed the order. And imagine what that does to the enthusiasm and the momentum that's built up within the firm. All of your colleagues have been involved, they're excited about the potential of a new system that's going to address lots of needs and issues for them, and then nothing happens for 12 months. And of course, only then will the implementation start. So when you've signed the contract, you've probably got another 6 to 12 months before the system is implemented and live. So do try and keep that momentum going. As we said already, price is important. You will have had some conversations already by this point. Don't expect massive discounts at this stage of the process. And if you are being offered massive discounts, then you might want to question that supplier's ability to implement the solution in the way that you want it to be implemented, and actually were they front loading the prices in the first place on the basis that they were always going to discount down the line. So we all expect something off, but don't expect massive discounts. Contracts, clearly they're important, but try and find the sort of 3 or 4 clauses that are giving you a little bit of concern. Discuss those with the supplier, reach a compromise and move on. Don't spend too much time going through every clause in the contract, because it's really not productive for either party. Timescales, again, they're important, of course. If you have a particular deadline that's immovable, you will have already addressed that during the earlier conversations, and clearly those suppliers that can't meet that deadline would have to unfortunately fall by the wayside. But it's also important, before you sign the contract, to arrange a pre-contract project meeting with the supplier. And what that will give you is the opportunity to firstly meet some other people from within the business, project manager, maybe a trainer, consultant, and so on, but also gives you an opportunity to understand, based on you signing the contract by date X, what the project's going to look like in terms of the key milestones, when they're likely to happen, and therefore when you're likely to go live. There's also benefit to the supplier, because what that means is that they will have a good understanding of how the project is going to be rolled out. They may have penciled in the dates already, so that when you do sign the contract, they can hit the ground running. So always useful in doing so. And I must mention that one client at the recent Innovators Forum said to me he wished he'd had a pre-contract meeting with a supplier they chose a couple of years ago, because he knew at the first project meeting post-contract signing that they weren't the supplier for him, but by then it was too late. So it's a really good gauge of assessing whether this supplier is going to be right for you. If you can, at this point in the negotiations, have a conversation with somebody at the top of the business, the CEO, COO, etc. They may well be involved in some of those conversations around contract and price anyway, but it's always good to get their view on their business, where it's going, what the product looks like in the future, how much investment is going into it. If there are external investors within the business, what's their strategy? Is there an exit point coming up, and what does that mean, and so on. So that will give you a good feel for the supplier and the business in general. And do please remember throughout, just a brief appeal on behalf of those of us in sales, that the salesperson does have a target. So if you've said you are the preferred supplier, great news, and we're signing next month, then just bear in mind the salesperson will have forecast that internally within his own business. And if that timescale slips for genuine reasons, again, just be upfront with them and let them know early doors, so that you're not having mismatched expectations between you and the salesperson that's been dealing with you. So in summary, keep the process simple. It's a complex decision and it's a big decision, but the process itself doesn't have to be overcomplicated. Make it inclusive, so get lots and lots of involvement from colleagues and staff. get them to buy into the idea of change. None of us are comfortable with change, but if we can actually have influence on that change and know that as a result we're going to get something better, then that gives it much more positive momentum when the system comes in. Keep that momentum going throughout. Ideally, you should be aiming for 3 to 6 months from when you start the process, i.e. the initial engagement with those suppliers, to the contract being signed off. If you possibly can, try and avoid summer holidays and Christmas wherever possible, because those are significant chunks of time where very little is going to happen. And what tends to result is you have to revisit various aspects of the discussions because people have forgotten them along the way. And remember, Accesspoint are here to help. So whether it's just friendly advice on who you should talk to, guidance throughout the process of selection, or even implementation, remember we are increasingly forging partnerships with practice and case management suppliers such as Action Step. So if you selected a system where we are the implementation partner, we already know you, we know your existing system, and therefore through the implementation process and data migration, we can make sure that that's as smooth a transition as possible. So do ask us for help if you feel you need it in your own selection process. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that's been useful. We will be releasing in conjunction with this episode an e-booklet, which will go into a little bit more detail in respect of what we talked about on this presentation. So do look out for that, and I'll see you at the next one. Thank you.